Again, welcome to our first seminar of 2026. This is actually our first seminar for the Terrestrial Ecosystem Group. Thank you so much for sticking with us. And my name is Lara. I'm the co-lead for this group with Liz Hoy and Elizabeth Powers, who are on the call too. So the theme of today's seminar is permafrost disturbance impacts on Arctic ecosystems and built environments. So we have two amazing speakers, Dr. Mark Lara and Dr. Valentina Ekimova. So as usual, we'll have about 20 minutes for each talk and followed by an open Q&A session, but we can have roughly 1 to 2 quick questions after the first talk. So we'll start with Mark. I want to give a quick introduction of Dr. Mark Lara is an associate professor from University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, sorry. He has been part of NASA Above project and also previously involved in DOE's Antarctic project. And his research focuses on understanding how Arctic ecosystems responding to climate change and disturbances. Today, he will talk to us about predicting ecosystem impacts, recovery, and build system impacts of thermal erosion in permafrost regions. I'll stop there. Mark, please take it over.
Sounds good. Thanks, Daryl. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. I think that should work. Hopefully you guys are seeing my screen at the moment. Is that right? Okay.
Yes.
So thanks for coming, everyone, and thanks for the invite. Although the title of my talk includes sort of the term thermal erosion, I'm going to be focusing particularly on retrogressive thaw slumps. And so why retrogressive thaw slumps? Thaw slumps are becoming increasingly common across permafrost regions associated with increases in temperature, increase in precipitation. These types of mass wasting features look a little bit something like you see on the right-hand side of your screen, sort of typically scallop-shaped features. However, the morphology of these types of features will likely vary across space. And so work by Antoni Lukovic a couple years ago kind of highlights this sort of potential impact extreme weather conditions or extreme summer conditions could have on triggering thousands of type of thaw slumps across different high Arctic regions. And so this is an example of the Banks Island kind of triggering about 60-fold increase in thaw slumps from 1984 to about 2013. And so it's not just in the high Arctic, also in high altitude or high elevation permafrost systems, such as here in the Qinghai Tibetan Plateau. Shaw et al. 2024 found RTSs or thaw slumps to increase threefold over about a 6-year period. And so this study kind of looked at sort of a census of about 4,000 different thaw slumps across this region. And interestingly, found about 80% of those thaw slumps were initiated within only 2 recent warm years. And so it's not just that these thaw slumps are becoming more frequent across space, but also they can be extremely large. And so this is one of the largest thaw slumps that we know of, the Batagayka crater, colloquially known as the gateway to the underworld in Siberia. And so this one is about 1 kilometer in diameter. The head wall, or essentially the surface of the undisturbed to the bottom of the disturbed terrain, is roughly about 100 meters in sort of a sheer cliff face, as well as it's expanding extremely fast, about 30 meters per year. And so let me see, I think I hear some audio. Thank you. Yeah. And so, sorry, I get very distracted very easily, so I have to ensure the audio is there. And so, so these types of thaw slumps can sort of be triggered by warmer or wetter conditions and have lots of implications for sediment and soil organic carbon release. This carbon mobilization following this release can potentially impact infrastructure, as well as sort of the ripping away of the surface vegetation. Of course, you're going to have a bit of biomass loss, but also over time, you do have a bit of recovery. So each of these 3 components I'm going to talk about at some level throughout the course of the talk. And so the first one I'm going to mention here is the soil carbon release, but particularly I'm sort of highlighting emphasis on prediction. So we're having a better understanding of where these types of features are occurring across space, as well as how they're changing. So the next step for us is to understand how they're going to change into the future. And so a good example here is a paper that was published last year, Dye et al. So in this particular study, the researchers sort of looked at sort of a time series, or at least essentially a decade of observations of the Arctic DEM. And so there's focus in particularly on active thaw slumps, and these thaw slumps were relatively large, about 10,000 meters squared. But they looked at about 2,000 thaw slumps. And so on the left-hand side of your screen there, you can sort of look at sort of estimates of volumetric loss across space. And so the darker red values represent sort of the higher volumetric losses. And so a lot of those red circles, they might be sort of indicative of these mega slumps, these slumps that are emitting lots and lots of sediment and carbon annually. And so although this particular study did include about 2,000 different thaw slumps, if we were to zoom in to one of these circles in northern Alaska, underneath that circle, we might have upwards of 400 to 500 different thaw slumps, most of which are relatively small. And so the data set or the data subset evaluated in this paper might represent, somewhere between the upper 10 to 15% of the size classes that exist across the circumpolar domain. But this paper went on to look at correlations with climate. The colors here on the left-hand side of your screen represent sort of positive or negative correlations with climate associated with all slump activity, as well as looked at general patterns of correlations between volumetric loss rates as well as temperature. And so you could see on, in panel B, a relatively nice, correlation between volumetric loss and temperature across all of these sites. However, if you look a little closer, you can see that most of these patterns are sort of driven by one particular region. And so these colors on panel C represent different regions broken out across the circumpolar domain. And so you could see Arctic lowlands in particular, which also correspond to those lowlands that we saw earlier within sort of the high amount of thaw slump activity on the Banks Island, seems to be driving a lot of this volumetric loss rate. And so potentially sort of looking at contributing to this potential correlation of volumetric loss and temperature that they were seeing across this permafrost domain. And so when we're thinking particularly about whether this is advancing our predictive knowledge, are we able to make predictions with this type of information? Although it is an awesome paper, it's giving us lots of insight into what's happening with these mega slumps across space. Is it advancing our predictive knowledge? Not yet. We're not there yet. And so what some of us have been doing in the lab are we've sort of stratified lots of different thaw slumps across northern Alaska based on activity level, looking at thaw slumps that are highly active, slumps that are relatively stable, slumps that vary in headwall heights from greater than 10 meters in height to less than 1 meter, as well as area, different size classes, very small slumps to very large slumps. But importantly, now we're looking at how these thaw slump dynamics are changing over a 70-year time period from about 1950 to 2021. And so this is sort of really important is because now we can look at sort of the influence of interannual variability in weather patterns, long-term climate trends, and how that might influence thaw slump dynamics over time. And so very quickly, what we did, we sort of looked at time series imagery. We characterized the two-dimensional change of aerial expansion across many different thaw slumps across these regions. We used terrestrial LiDAR, UAS LiDAR to sort of calibrate the Arctic DEM so we can get better volumetric losses once we sort of relate those annual expansion rates with volumetric estimates. And so at the end of this, we computed annual rates of expansion as well as annual rates of volumetric losses. We can then throw that information into predictive models or boosted regression tree models using range of morphometric drivers, climate drivers, and then look to see how well we were able to predict these two variables. And so the models are doing pretty well, able to predict most of the variation. But importantly, what we find is that when we look specifically at our climate drivers, precipitation and the summer warmth index, or a metric of temperature, we could find that these climate variables explain, less than 20% of the overall variability within these models. And so just indicating that, yes, climate is an important driver, but there's other sort of morphometric properties that could be more important. So like in our aerial model, for example, we found that aspect was an extremely important driver of two-dimensional aerial change. Whereas when we're talking about volumetric change, head wall height was our most important variable, which makes a lot of sense. So that the taller the head wall, the more likely you're going to be emitting higher amounts of volume or sediment into the system. And so now we have these predictive models. Now we can ask the question, how might fossil lumps change into the future, at least within northern Alaska? And we find generally that our aerial and volumetric estimates will increase by about 30 to 20% by the end of the century. But most importantly, what we find is a breakdown between size classes in terms of the response. So the small and the medium-sized fossil lumps are going to be increasing by about 1.5 to about 3 times increase in both aerial and volumetric change by the end of the century, whereas the large fossil lumps, we saw limited change. And so this just indicates that to best understand these dynamic processes, we really have to break this down based on the size of the slumps, which is going to influence how they change into the future. And so, with the release of the Arctic DEM7, INSAR-based interferogrammetric methods derived from, 10-DEMX or NISAR, I feel our understanding of volumetric losses from these types of mass wasting or thermal erosional types of features will be well understood in relatively short order. But what about the built environment? And so on the right-hand side of your screen represents sort of the distribution of fossil lump area as estimated by Igmar and Nitze's 2025 paper. And so on the left-hand side of the screen, it represents a map of sort of where the railway across this region actually exists. And that red circle right in the center there represents sort of the distribution of fossil lump activity as estimated from Igmar's work. And so when we're talking about railways, it doesn't necessarily seem that railways are going to be heavily impacted by these types of disturbances. What about buildings? So yeah, there are buildings within this domain. However, few and far between. And so therefore buildings might not be heavily impacted by fossil lump activity, thermal erosional type of activity within this region. What about roads? Roads, there's more roads within this environment. And so roads might be one of those types of the built infrastructure or the built environment that might be impacted in the future. And so this corresponds with what we see around the Dalton Highway in northern Alaska. So these are frozen debris lobes that are creeping down off of the Brooks Range and slowly coming closer and closer to the Dalton Highway. And so Margaret Darrow from the University of Alaska Fairbanks has documented about 23 of these debris lobes coming from the Brooks Range that are coming about 1 mile away from the road. And so there's sections of the road that have been rerouted to sort of ensure that it's not overrun by some of these debris lobes. And so it's kind of fun in some of these articles written about these things, sort of floating ideas of how to deal with them. One example was maybe we blow them up with dynamite, right? And so, but of course, that was quickly stifled, as it might have some implications downstream for permafrost, right? And so it's not just the Dalton Highway. Also in the Dempster Highway in northwestern Canada, this is an article put forward by Jurjen van der Sluwe and Ashley Rudy, kind of documenting a couple of fossil lumps that have occurred within 2017. This is repeat DEMs here on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And so the fossil lumps at the top right-hand corner there, initiated in 2017, pushing about 20,000 meters cubed of sediment down this small drainage channel, and that came about 200 meters from the Dempster Highway. So this is, although it didn't hit this highway, if it did impact this highway system, it would have substantial implications for those Arctic villages that use these highways as lifelines for resources. And so So yeah, there's still a lot for us to understand about the interactions between sort of the built infrastructure, specifically these road networks, and the initialization of some of these thermal erosional features. So that's going to be something that we'll have to deal with a bit more in the coming future. And just to have a bit of a gear shift here, I'm going to shift gears here. So in addition to the geomorphic impacts that these thaw slumps produce, they also fundamentally alter the vegetation structure of the system. And so this is something that we've been really interested as of late, just trying to figure out how vegetation recovers following disturbance. And so to best understand vegetation, we really have to use fine spatial spectral resolution information so that we could sort of evaluate how plant species are changing, how plant functional types are changing in response to these disturbances. And so I'm going to show you two quick examples, one at the pan-Arctic scale and two at sort of the regional to local scale of how we're looking at and sort of evaluating, characterizing patterns of vegetation change and creeping us ever so slowly to a better understanding of vegetation succession in the process. And so one of the ways that we've been doing this has been leveraging planet scope data. And so this is 3-meter resolution products. We're calculating NDVI with this. We're looking at NDVI pre and post disturbance. Disturbance here is going to be right in the where that sort of red rectangle is within this plot. And so we're sort of tracking these patterns of surface greenness. After initiation of these thaw slumps, you do have a bit of a browning trend, which is quickly overrun by greening trend, which is then associated with a bit of recovery. So the way that we're defining recovery is when this NDVI values become relatively equivalent to that of the undisturbed. And so that's important to note there. And so in addition to this NDVI greening signals, we're also relying on centimeter resolution observations to then look to see what the fractional cover of erect shrubs, low stature vegetation, as well as bare ground at a couple of these sites. So not only look at how greening is changing, but also how vegetation composition might be changing across time as well. And so we've been doing this at a range of different sites across the circumpolar permafrost region, including Toolik Lake region, McKenzie Delta, Western Banks Island, Eastern Banks Island, Yamal Peninsula, Western Kenai Dependent Plateau, Central Kenai Dependent Plateau, Noatak River watershed, as well as a couple other sites, the Peel Plateau, Herschel Island, and two more Siberian sites. And so generally what we find is lots of variability in terms of recovery time. Some sites are recovering on the order of less than a decade to a decade. Other sites don't recover until over a century. However, what we find is that we're able to predict these recovery rates quite nicely with this power law relationship with solar-induced chlorophyll fluorescence data. And so which estimates sort of mean annual gross primary productivity. And so depending on what the primary productivity is of that particular system is very predictable for how long it's going to take for that system to recover. So this, be on the lookout for this paper. This paper was just accepted in Nature Climate Change, should be out for your all's pleasure to read in a couple of, I would say like 2 weeks time. But importantly, even though we're able to predict the recovery of vegetation cover, the recovery of vegetation cover does not equal recovery of the diversity of vegetation within these sites. And what recovers after disturbance really, really matters. And so you might have willow species that could potentially grow upwards of 5 meters in height. Other willow species might only grow a couple centimeters in height. So depending on which willow species that colonizes these types of thaw slumps following disturbance will have heavy implications on above ground carbon storage, right? And so, but the only way that we can really evaluate and discriminate between these different types of vegetation species and cover types is with hyperspectral imaging spectroscopy. And so with this, we can sort of begin to differentiate between the different spectral signatures associated with these different cover types. Hyperspectral data is available across much of this North American region of the permafrost domain, specifically made available by NASA above. And so here, so you can see some of the flight lines associated with that. But when we actually look at where those flight lines exist with respect to where these thaw slumps exist, most of these flight lines don't overlap those thaw slumps. And so that's an issue. So the way that we've overcome that issue is then we've started to think about creating our own hyperspectral product or simulating our hyperspectral data. And so how did we do that? So we essentially took end-member spectra from all of these dominant vegetation species, vegetation cover types. We throw that into an analysis called uniform pattern decomposition method, fuse that with sort of Sentinel-2 data products. We could then simulate AVERIS-3, which is essentially our airborne hyperspectral data product. And we can actually come up with a very similar result as to what AVERIS actually sees. We can take this data-rich spectral information or simulated spectral information, and then throw it into fractional cover models that we can then begin to predict the species cover or the fractional cover of these different dominant cover types that exist within these thaw slumps. At this point, we have these models, and now we can extrapolate across different thaw slumps. And as an example, we can actually recreate the fraction of vegetation cover across many of these thaw slumps, and we can take this type of information and feed it into models that, such as these Markov chain models, to then predict patterns of vegetation succession, and to look to see how fast different types of vegetation recolonize after disturbance. And of course, this is going to vary from different gradients, and this is just a couple of elevation gradients that I'm sort of showing here. And so this is the direction we're taking much of this research. We're going to continue to expand a lot of these hyperspectral data simulation approaches across this North American permafrost domain, sort of leaning hard on this DARTS database, which is this database of thaw slumps produced by Igmar and Itzi. The reason why we're doing this to create these succession models, but not only to look at patterns of succession, but look at how these patterns of succession vary across climate gradients within this region. And so why are we doing all of this? Well, there's lots of narratives coming out about how bad it's going to get with respect to carbon loss from these permafrost environments, as well as Merit Turetsky's 2020 paper suggests that the above or the abrupt patterns of permafrost thaw can likely exacerbate this carbon loss by up to 40%. So what we're presenting here is a potential negative feedback to climate associated with vegetation growth. And so the impact of vegetation growth following these types of disturbances and how much carbon drawdown that might provide us to counteract these losses of permafrost carbon, essentially unknown at the moment, but this is what we're working toward to figure out. So having said that, I'd like to thank the graduate students in the lab that helped pull some of this work together, some of the postdocs, funding sources, and for your all's attention. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. Excellent talk. It's really, really interesting. We have time for one question. If you have any burning questions you want to just get out of your mouth, feel free to raise your hands. A lot of hands.
Hey, Mark, can you hear me?
Hey, John, how's it going? Yes, I can hear you.
Hey, yeah, just curious about sort of the carbon balance of these things. You're talking about sort of a dynamic recovery with the vegetation, drawing down carbon, and obviously the loss is unconstrained. I'm curious, in a lot of like agricultural settings, erosion, deposition can kind of be can be a net sink overall. I'm curious if you've thought about how the retrogressive thaw slump ecosystems compare to agricultural settings, and like how much carbon burial might be another sink term and all of that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, John. So there's a couple of papers that came out in Canada that kind of suggested that a lot of the carbon and sediment coming out of these thaw slumps were just sort of redistributed across the landscape. They're not necessarily being mobilized by microbial respiration or anything like that. And so, But however, the sort of I guess the school of thought prior to this suite of papers that have come out recently was that a lot of that carbon is mobilized, and so that how bad is this going to get for us? But I think more and more data points uh, you know are becoming known that yeah, perhaps yeah, it's although the jury's still out, I think this analysis needs to be done. But I feel like the direction some of this is moving towards, thaw slumps could potentially be a substantial sink in that you're essentially transitioning tussock tundra to large willow tundra all over the place. Like, of course, there's the patterns of recolonization is going to vary across space, but in terms of the sheer carbon balance, I think there's still a whole lot of work to be done regarding sort of what's going on with the fate of that carbon and relative to the new potential sink strength. But with respect to the agricultural dimension, I have it. Even though I'm from the Midwest over here, I should be whipped for not having some type of opinion in that regard. But yeah, I'll say no comment there.
Cool. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. We'll save the rest of the question to the end of the seminar. Next, we'll switch to Dr. Valentina. So Dr. Valentina Ekimova is an Environmental Institute Climate Fellow from University of Virginia. She has been working with Professor Holly Epstein on an Arctic cities project, focusing on understanding the influence of climate change on permafrost dynamics through the terrestrial micrometeorological data analysis. Today, he'll present about permafrost disturbance in natural and built Arctic ecosystems, field observations, and remote sensing from Uchyavik. So Valentina, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. It's actually quite nice to speak after Mark because practically he mentioned about roads, and today actually exactly will be telling about our research, which showed that different land use type influencing permafrost in Utqiagvik, Alaska. Just a bit about my background. So I actually studied permafrost already for more than 15 years, but before I was studying it mainly in experimental way, in experimental modeling, and I was particularly focused on the very vulnerable compound, which is gas inside the ice, gas hydrates. And it gave me an understanding of the fundamentals of permafrost dependencies as their response to climate change and as a response to anthropogenic influence. But I was lucky enough after getting my PhD to get position in Environmental Institute in UVA, and I joined the project, which is collaborative between different disciplines. So we have a representative from the architecture, we have representatives from the social science, we have representative from the terrestrial ecology, so different sides. And we are trying to address how permafrost dynamics respond to climate change and to infrastructure influence in Utqiagvik, Alaska. And particularly my part is I'm focusing on geophysical research, I'm focusing on permafrost dynamic and geological processes. I'm also doing analysis of natural water quality and micrometeorological sensor analysis and snow parameter analysis. That seems like might be not very connected, but as we all know, everything is influencing permafrost, and assessing all of that together can help to understand, like mitigate or adapt to the current changes. And why does research matter? Of course, first of all, as I already mentioned, there is we all know about Arctic amplification, that the rise of temperatures there is much faster than in the rest of the world. As Mark already mentioned, there is a carbon emission problem because it's twice larger carbon than in the atmosphere. But also it's about communities itself, how they are going to keep living there, and how infrastructure react on that. So it can be due to climate warming, but also it can be related to snow and water management, and that's what we, with our team, trying to respond. So you can see on this picture that there is a snow pile in front of the apartment building, or there is ponding in one of the roads. It's practically almost completely flooded all the road. Or there is water discharge in one of the lagoon I'm tasting. So today, I would like exactly to tell you about what have we seen in subsurface area in Utgavik. And if I will have time, I will a little bit share some results on satellite snow metrics, which we also analyze, because both of that is very important for understanding how current permafrost change, what is the current permafrost change in Utgavik. And it's kind of interesting that usually when I was dreaming to go to the field, I was imagining like high technologies, and many of students imagining like, oh, going to Arctic, seeing the northern lights. But we all know that it's hard work, hammering the ice in their winter, or standing in the lagoon by measuring of their water quality. So a lot of fun. I like field. So the physical survey which we conducted, it was conducted in the peak thaw in 2021, 2022, and 2023. Here on the picture, you can see ERT line, which were just conducted below the building, and I will show exactly results below this building, or GPR analysis, GPR survey, which we conducted also along some of the lines of ERT. So their major idea behind this research was to analyze different land use type. How does it influence subsurface heterogeneity in Utgavik? So we analyzed residence building, which is right in the middle of the city, old road, which is not longer used, it's old spur, and also bio, which is practically comparison site. It's undisturbed tundra. Nothing built there, and also snow fence, which is also interesting site. That is just to recall what exactly we are focused on. So there is electric resistivity, mainly showing how conductive is different sediments, depending on the ice content, depending on their salt content, how conductive they are to the current. So of course, there are areas which is thawed, they will be with low resistivity. They will be very conductive for the current. And especially it's interesting that there is also part of permafrost, which is with high resistivity, because it's a lot of salts and it's usually unfrozen. So it's called cryopax, liquid permafrost. And the rest, what is shown in the colder colors here, is practically what we're interested in. It's everything what above 1,000 on. It's ice-rich zones. So the first site which we analyzed, it's snow fence. So it's practically built in Utgavik to protect city from the blowing wind and roads. And here, usually from that side, exactly accumulation of the snow occur. I will show you some of their aerial pictures. So our GPR and ERT line is going perpendicular to the snow fence. Here is the snow fence itself. And you can see that this area is actually ice wedge polygon, degrading ice wedge polygon. So their large-scale ERT profile showing that there is a lot of ice-rich areas nearby snow fence. Here is the snow fence. And potentially there is also a cryopax zone, but it's too low to tell it with certainty. But especially it's interesting that here's ice-rich zone. The closer look on the ERT profile showing us their depth of active layer, the layer which is thaw in the summer and freezes back in winter. Very dynamic layer and very important characteristic. And we can see that this side, which is closer to the road, is actually experiencing deeper thaw than in case of further away towards the tundra, and especially after the snow fence. And it's interesting that here in this area nearby snow fence, there is some bump. And actually it's also elevation as well. And by their values of resistivity, it actually show very high resistivity, which might highlight high ice content. GPR profile is confirming this finding. So we can see that there's much deeper thaw near the road. So it's right here. And then it's going shallower. And after the snow fence, it's much more stable. Permafrost much more stable than in case of this area from the road to the snow fence. And again, we can see that their active layer depth near the snow fence is very shallow. And finally, we also did physical toe depth probing with metal probe, and we can see that the results are pretty consistent about between ground truth and between geophysics. So this site is practically showing that this snowdrift, which is formed behind, like from that side, Liverant side of the snow fence, is keeping ground warmer, like warmer than in the areas where there's no snow during winter, but also it keeps ground colder during melting season, which is actually causes this ground to remain unthawed for a longer period of time. Plus, there is also ponding of the water around this snowdrift, and it's also promote ice wedge degradation. So it's like very controversial processes happening here. But as a result, we see deepening of the active layer in this area. The next area which we analyzed, it was BIO. So it's tundra environmental observation station. So it's practically undisturbed. There's nothing built there, but we also can see that here's ice wedge polygon, which is much more stable than in case of snow fence area. But it's also interesting that here, as we see on this Google Drive, Google Maps, we can see some of the snowdrifts as well forming here. So the large-scale geophysics showing again these high ice content areas, which is quite expectable in this area of ice wedge polygon, but also potentially cryopack as well, area of unfrozen permafrost, saline permafrost. And closer look on ERT, you can see that at the road area, it's right here where the ERT started, there is deepest thaw right near the road. So by the field observation we saw here near the road, standing water, it almost remains all the season long. So it's practically promote thawing of permafrost even more in this area. And plus we also can expect that road also promote this thawing because even in the beginning of the winter season, you can see that this road is very active. It's cleaned and cars are still going there during all the season. So there is temperature influence. Plus during summer season, the gravel, which used for roads, it's also more thermal conductive. So we can expect deeper thaw below this area. But if you are moving from the road towards the tundra, the active layer depths became shallower. The same we can see on GPR. Practically, GPR couldn't even trace their permafrost depths in this area. It also might be associated that in this area a lot of air, so it's like not very good contact with GPR. But in the rest, we can see that close to the road, there is deeper thaw, and when we are moving towards tundra, there is shallower depths. And also, we were able to trace ice wedges on the GPR profiles. And again, our toe depth probing actually confirmed all the finding of their geophysics for this area. Another interesting place is road, which is not longer used. It's old spur of the K-Keter road in Utgavik. So there was two profiles conducted, one GPR and one ERT, conducted perpendicular to the road, and two GPRs conducted along the road. And this image is just one of the example. I was just telling you about ponding, which is happening near BO, near the road, but it's also happening along many other roads in Utgavik. So this is example of the road and ponding, and you can see that there is also snowdrift. It's both a snow management and snowdrift because of the wind blow. So on the large scale of the GPR, we again can see this very high ice content. But especially it's interesting to take a look closer because we can see deeper thaw below the road. Same dependencies I described for BO, like it's more thermal conductive during summer. And secondly, there is also thawing because there is still a thermal influence on this road, even after it's not so widely used. And also what is interesting that this side of the road is more stable permafrost. The active layer is shallower than this side of the road. And we can see even by the satellite imagery that this ice wedge polygon is more degraded than this one. And that's actually showing us that because wind direction is like in this side, and this is Liveland side, road actually behaving as a snow fence, and it's creating the same dependencies we saw on the snow fence. So this side of the snow fence, but it's practically road, is more stable than the side where the snow drift is accumulating. And that is the same thing is confirmed by the tow probing. And we also can see that their 11 profile, which is conducted by Liveron side, is showing deeper active layer depth than in case of 10, which is the site which doesn't have a snowdrift. Another interesting area, especially interesting area, I would say, it's the transect which were conducted below the building. So we have two ERT lines which conducted below the building, touching the area below the apartment building, raised on piles to protect permafrost from thawing, and part of GPR, which is also touching these ERT lines. And we can see that the building influence on permafrost is especially interesting because there is not much snow during winter below the building, as is shown on this picture. So practically the ground is kept colder in this area during winter. And in spring, there's practically shading occurred there. So there is no active thawing going on there. So we can see that their area below the building is with high ice content, and there is dipping of the active layer from the side of the building. Dipping of the active layer from the side of the building can be associated, first of all, that it's active passage for the cars. Here is also parking lot, but also it might be associated with their meltwater going from the roof, from the side, and also precipitation. So GPR is also confirming this finding as well. So it's pretty interesting. So, and just in the last few minutes, I would like to just firstly show you, because what I already highlighted that the snow management and snow accumulation in general plays a big role. It's practically tell us where permafrost can be more vulnerable. And that's why our previous project, which in the frame of which these geophysics were conducted, it's also continue in another project of snow and water management. So as already mentioned, snow keeps ground warmer than in any other areas. So that's, I would tell, like trailer of the next, one of the next talk, hopefully, and one of the next publication. We are now analyzing with satellite imagery what is the snow cover in Utgiavik, where how exactly infrastructure influence. I will just run through this slide just to show you the most interesting parts. So we analyzed what is the density of the buildings in Utgiavik and how this density of the buildings result in snow accumulation. And we, just preliminary results, we saw that snow persists longer in tundra than in high and medium infrastructure load, which is very expectable. But now we can apply this pipeline, which we developed, for the more localized analysis. How is different parts of the city influence snow accumulation, and how vulnerable is permafrost in different areas of the city. Also, there was analysis of the albedo, and of course, albedo keeps higher values in the tundra area than in high and medium infrastructure load. It's highly likely mainly associated with dust. Dust in Utgiavik is a big problem. So their next part of the research will be to try to get snow depths with using of satellite imagery. It's a very difficult task. So far, we collected a lot of ground truth data, and now with machine learning, we'll try to address this challenge and to analyze permafrost. So that is just like a short introduction to the snow part, but there's a lot of interesting research going on around Yudgayavik, and particularly especially interested in addressing what community telling us what is interesting for them. So that is our project on co-production of the knowledge. And that's why I mentioned about, for instance, water analysis as well, because that's what is of concerns for community as well. So permafrost is tooling their underwarming climate and infrastructure influence. There is some specific hotspots, and our multi-method approach helps to capture these processes. And this observation together can show how climate forcing interacts with local infrastructure and how management control permafrost dynamic as well. So hopefully this will help in future to risk mapping and practical adaptation for the communities. I would like to thank all the team with whom we conducted this research. It's several PIs from different directions I already mentioned, and also postdocs of different specialty and PhD students. And also I would like to acknowledge that this research presented here was conducted on the ancestral land of the Inupiat in Yudgayavik, and express deep gratitude and respect to the community for their knowledge sharing and for their feedback on the current project. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, I would be glad to answer you.
Thank you, Valentina. That was really interesting. A lot of very, very interesting findings that, can inform a lot of understandings. I think let's open for questions, and if you have, we can start with 1 or 2 quick questions for Valentina, if you have. After that, we can open the conversation to both Mark and Valentina. Any quick question for Valentina?
Hi, this is Liz. Liz Hoy. I'm one of the co-leads for the Terrestrial team. I just want to thank both of our speakers, and also I don't remember if we mentioned this at the beginning, but I wanted to say thanks to the Permafrost team for helping us to co-lead this meeting, and I saw John O'Donnell on there, and I wanted to say thanks. But then I did have a question for Valentina too, and I was just wondering, you listed a lot of community partners and there are management implications for some of this work, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about the transition of this research into action in the community, or how you're working a bit more with those community partners and providing them with information for their decision-making process.
That's a really amazing question. Thank you so much. So I would tell that for me, it's amazing because I started just 2 years ago, and I came from the community, from the scientific area, from the scientific environment where knowledge is not shared. It's science for the sake of science, and for me, it's like amazing how my team is working, and I'm also trying to do the same. So what my team is doing, and I'm together with them. So during all the project, we had a meeting with community where they could share their feedback on is the result is useful for them. Do they have anything to add? Because this community live there always, and they know sometimes more than we do. So they usually share their input on their how permafrost used to be several generations ago. What are the current changes occurred? So, for instance, I have been on the community meeting previous year, year ago in 2024. And there was exactly feedback from one of the citizens of Yudgayavik, and he told like, "Oh, have you checked this lake behind the laboratory? It's look not nice." So that's how my research on lagoon started. And this year we are going to conduct kind of wrapping up already of NSF project. We now working on another project, but still at the same community. And we would like to hear, is this information is useful for them, the one which we will conduct. hopefully will come with some specific metrics which they can use to mitigate current changes. I'm not telling anything concrete because that's still work in progress, but that is our goal, to make it useful for the community. Also, what we propose is to keep there the cheap network of sensors which we already implemented there. So hopefully it also will be used by community. That's in short. Thank you for the question.
Thanks. That's really interesting.
Cool. I have several questions, but I would like to have other folks ask their question first. Questions? I'll wait for 7 seconds. Okay. My first question is to Valentina. It's really interesting to see your satellite-based analysis of albedo changes, and also the snow timing changes. We're just curious because I was never in Reykjavik in winter. Do people do snow removal in winter, and how does that impact the snow timing?
Yes, so it's a very interesting question. It's amazing because we have been there in May of previous year, like mid-May. It still was snow season. It's just beginning of the melt. And we were able to see snow management there. So it's practically pulling the snow from all city. Of course, it's not completely without snow. But we also saw it by the India side that the melting occurs so fast because practically like in the city, there is not much snow. And there is huge dumpster of the snow out like close to the city from different sites. And again, like a trailer for future research, our team allocated one of the sensors below one of the snow pile, which is more than 5 meters in the height. So they are putting their snow from the city. So we will see what is exactly during especially seasons, how it's exactly influencing. But I would expect that, of course, it will delay thawing, of course, because practically this snow pile was still there when we went late in June. It still was there, just like remaining, but still. So it will keep ground colder during summer, but also it's a warming effect, like warmer part in winter. So it's kind of controversial. And so far by the data seems like cooling actually stronger than warming. So it's just interesting. It's just the future.
Thank you. That's very interesting. So any other questions for Valentina and Mark? Mark, can I ask a question?
You may not.
I'll mute myself. So I was really intrigued by the predictability that you show, the correlation between recovery time and the GPP, which there's a negative nonlinear correlation between the recovery time and the GPP. Can you elaborate a little bit more? Based on the figure, my understanding is the smaller GPP you got, the longer recovery time it takes. And if GPP is higher, it takes less time to recover. That's a little bit intuitive, so I'm trying to understand that.
That's exactly right. Yeah, so you can imagine if you were in a high productive like boreal forest tundra ecotone, productivity is going to be relatively high, right? And so within that type of system, not only is productivity high, you're also going to have higher species composition. You're going to have a higher diversity overall, and so therefore the recovery rate of a landscape that was completely barren of vegetation or individuals that exist in that location will be a bit higher in terms of the rate in which those pioneer species can colonize. And so if you have a larger species diversity, there's more individuals that could likely quickly move into that terrain. And so whereas if you sort of contrast that with extreme high Arctic environments where it's extremely cold, you have sort of more of mosses, lichens dominate in those types of systems. The potential for not only recovery or dispersal or dispersal potential is extremely low. And so, when you do have any type of disturbance to those types of fragile systems, it takes a very, very long time for you to recolonize that type of terrain. And so, and so just to be extremely clear about how we use that solar-induced chlorophyll fluorescence data, it wasn't within the particular thaw slump. Those were estimates within the general region where these thaw slumps exist. Example, for maybe like Herschel Island. Herschel Island, there's a range of different thaw slumps that exist within that region. So what we did was estimated GPP for that general region. And so that estimate of GPP corresponded with all the thaw slumps that we evaluated in that region. So that estimate was a really nice predictor for how fast plants can move into those types of systems.
Awesome. Thanks for the clarification. I'll turn it back to Tony. Do you have some final words you have to say on behalf of IARPIC?
Yeah, I will just reiterate that the recording from today will be available probably tomorrow afternoon, and I'll put some links in the chat of where that will be posted. And I'll also say keep a lookout. We're working on the next terrestrial meeting, which will be co-hosted with the STEM collaboration team of IARPIC, featuring the two fellows who served as co-leads for those two teams for the past 18 months. So that's not live yet, but more to come. Maybe one other thing that I'll put in the chat is we do have a form, a suggestion form if there's any other topics that you'd like to see terrestrial ecosystems, permafrost, or any of our other IARPIC teams or communities cover. You can submit it using that form. But otherwise, I would just, reiterate, thank you so much, Mark, Valentina, and for all of our guests here today for joining for an hour of your Wednesday.
Yep, thank you. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you so much.
Thanks, Mark and Valentina again. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.